Hi folks, welcome to Haunted Stories. Here are the 5 horrific condominium haunted stories. Enjoy. Story number 1. Vacant Room. Valeria had the perfect life. She had her own condo that overlooked the city, a good job that paid her wages well, and plenty of money left after to go on little adventures. She even had just enough room in her one-bedroom place for her and her cat, Simba. Although she was content with her life, what made it so perfect was the cozy feel of the place. She thanked her lucky stars for finding this amazing opportunity. Just southeast of her condominium was a vacant room. Valeria had heard rumors from the other tenants in the building that it was haunted. Many of them had heard strange noises late at night, and they were sure it was a ghost. Valeria shrugged it off. She figured it was just a building rumor, nothing more. However, one night Valeria was awoken after hearing constant crying coming from the vacant room. It sounded like a young girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, just sobbing her heart out. Valeria had never heard anything so sad in her life. She figured it must be the ghost rumored to reside in the vacant room. Valeria felt the need to do something to help the poor girl, so she got up and slowly opened her front door. She peered into the hall and saw nothing, yet the sobbing continued. Valeria took a deep breath and walked through the long hallway towards the vacant room. Once she opened the door to the room, the flood of memories engulfed Valeria. The room was filled with furniture, toys, and various possessions that looked familiar to Valeria. It was then that she realized that this was her old bedroom when she was still a child. The girl sobbing in the corner was her younger self, crying for the things she had lost. Valeria held back tears, as she finally understood why her old bedroom was haunted. She had created the ghost without even realizing it. In that moment, Valeria could feel her younger self's pain and regret. She realized no amount of material possessions could bring comfort to her younger self's sorrow. The ghost of her younger self had been bound to the vacant room, and it would likely remain there until the end of time. If only Valeria had taken time to understand her past and bridge the gap between her current and former selves, the ghost would have never existed at all. Valeria walked back to her condo and left the vacant room sealed behind her. She eventually left the condominium behind and gave up on her perfect life. Some things, she thought to herself, were better left forgotten. Story number 2. Babies crying. Andre had just moved into his new condo, and while the rest of the building seemed to be in good condition, there had been one odd detail. The unit to the right of his had always been empty, yet at night, he could hear a ghostly sobbing emanating from the property. Every night he would lie awake while these sorrowful sobs drifted through the walls, clearly coming from the vacant condo. Being naturally curious, Andre decided to investigate the source of the crying. He put on an old coat and a beanie and ventured into the empty unit. Inside, the place was dark and eerie as he cautiously took each step, dust and cobwebs clinging to his shoes. He flipped on the lights and the vision he saw made a chill run up his spine. In the center of the room was an old rocking chair, its movement producing the sound of a crying baby. Andre slowly made his way to the chair, his heart racing in his chest as he slowly lowered himself to look. And there was the baby, a real one, ghostly pale and motionless. Andre's hands shook as he quickly picked up the baby, frantically checking for any signs of life. All at once, the baby opened its eyes and Andre gasped. The little bundle in his arms was completely translucent, the only source of life emanating from her bright, glowing blue eyes. Andre froze, mesmerized by the baby's presence. He wanted to take the ghostly infant home and care for her, but he knew that her existence was unexplainable, and he'd never get away with it. He quickly exited the room and returned to his condo, leaving the ghostly baby behind in what had been her home for eternity. From that night forward, Andre heard the crying coming from the vacant condo. He would lie in his bed, listening to the ghostly wails, and it hit him. He should never have left her all alone, and the ghostly crying he heard was the baby's sadness at being left behind. Tears streaming down his face, Andre vowed he would never forget the tragic ending to this mysterious ghost story. Story number 3. Samantha's new unit. Samantha had just moved into a condo that she had been wanting for years. It was a beautiful and spacious place right in the heart of the city, and she had high hopes that the condo would become her own little home of happiness and solace. What she hadn't expected, however, was the vacant room right next to her condo. She hadn't seen it when she signed the lease, as it was hidden away, tucked away behind a locked door and forgotten by the property managers. She hadn't given it much thought, until one day, when she heard a soft sobbing noise coming from the room. The sounds only ever occurred late at night, as the city went quiet. Samantha felt unsettled and asked around the other tenants living in the building, but no one said they had heard anything like it. Even her neighbors living in the other condos closest to the room claimed they hadn't even noticed it being there. Samantha began to believe that the sounds were just in her head until eventually, she found the courage to open the door. To her surprise, the room was filled with a thick, suffocating air that seemed to be sad and haunted at the same time. Shelves and furniture lined the walls, untouched and covered in dust, as if they hadn't been used for years. The most alarming aspect of the room was a mysterious old mirror, which seemed to be the source of the sobbing noise. When Samantha looked into the mirror, she saw a hazy image of a ghostly figure, dressed in deep mourning clothes, crying sadly. Samantha quickly backed away, terrified. She eased the door closed and did her best to ignore the noise from the room. She felt a pang of guilt for knowing that a ghost was trapped in her building, and that there was nothing she could do about it. Days later, Samantha had a vivid nightmare in which the ghostly figure begged her to help set him free. In the dream, the ghost explained that he had been trapped in the mirror for centuries and could only be freed by someone who had the power of good intentions. Samantha awoke in a cold sweat, realizing that the only way to set the ghost free was to break the mirror. The next evening, Samantha nervously approached the room. Heart pounding, she wrapped her hand around the mirror and with one sharp crack, it shattered. Immediately, the ghost evaporated and vanished, leaving a sense of peace and closure. As Samantha walked away, she looked up to the night sky and silently thanked the ghost, wherever it had gone, for showing her the path to freedom. Story number 4. Newly rented condo. Mina was only 20 years old when she moved into her newly rented condo. She was excited to start her new life and explore the city on her own for the first time. However, the condo had one unusual feature that made Mina apprehensive. The condo was connected to another empty room. At first, Mina didn't think much of it and tried to push it to the back of her mind. However, no matter how hard she tried, Mina could always hear faint crying coming from the other room. The sound was incredibly unsettling and she laid awake at night wondering who or what the sound was coming from. One night, Mina decided she could no longer ignore the mysterious crying and decided to investigate. It was terrifying, but she mustered up all her courage and finally opened the door to the other room. When she opened the door, she saw something horrific. In the middle of the room, a ghost-like figure was sobbing out loud. Mina was so scared that she almost fainted and scrambled to close the door. However, before she could close the door, the ghost spoke. She said her name was Elizabeth and she had been died tragically in the other room 100 years ago. Mina felt incredibly sorry for Elizabeth and began to visit her often to chat and comfort her. She was the only one who has been willing to talk to Elizabeth in 100 years. After many years of visiting her, Elizabeth finally found the strength to move on and left the room forever. Mina was sad and elated at the same time, sad to see her go, but elated that Elizabeth had found peace and moved on. From then on, Mina kept the room closed and only visited it when she needed some peace and quiet. Mina could never get over the tragic story of Elizabeth, and every time she passed the room, she was reminded of the ghost's heartbreaking story. And now for our last story, here is story number 5. The Trapped Spirit. A young immigrant, Jonas, moved into an old condo building in a big city. While exploring his new home, he quickly noticed one room next to his, empty and unused. It held a reputation among the neighbors of being an eerie place. No one wanted to talk about it, and even his landlord told him it was best to stay away. Despite the hushed warnings, Jonas grew more curious by the day. One day, he decided to muster up the courage to take a peek inside. He stepped cautiously into the room and saw nothing but empty walls and a single window against the far wall. It seemed harmless until he heard it. Behind him, in the corner, someone was crying. Not knowing what to do, Jonas slowly backed away, only to find himself in the same corner he entered. He heard the sobbing again, louder this time. As he spun around, there it was, an old woman in a faded gray dress standing right in front of him. He noticed her eyes were bright and beautiful but overshadowed by an intense sorrow. The ghostly woman looked at Jonas with regret, and told him her story. She was a poor immigrant in the early 20th century, suffering from a difficult financial burden and being abused by her partner. She found the empty room and used it to escape her pain, until one day she locked the door and never opened it again. She died in the same corner that Jonas found himself now, never to be able to find freedom and peace. The ghost begged Jonas for his help. She wanted to be released from her tragic past and desperate loneliness, but could not find a way to move on to the afterlife. Jonas offered his sympathies and comforted her in the best way that he could before eventually leading her to the windowsill. With a tearful goodbye, the ghost finally was able to move on and disappear into the night. Jonas never returned to the vacant room in the condo building, but he always remembered the story of the ghost who found solace there. To him, it served as a reminder to appreciate what he had in this life and to always show kindness to those in need. This is where the stories end. I hope you like it and please subscribe this channel. Until next haunted stories, folks.